The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, religion, and housing. We'll explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Paula Wilson, community educator for the Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement, better known as HCCI. Hi, Paula. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, HCCI has a tremendous history in Harlem in helping to develop housing. Your former chairman, the late Cannon Williams, and now your CEO, Lucille McEwen, have done a tremendous amount in housing. Now, tell us about the approaches that HCCI uses to develop housing in Harlem.
One of the things that HCCI is noted for is housing development, but we also work to develop a holistic community. So we provide social services as well as training. We've developed some 2,000 units in the Harlem area. We've worked feverishly to make sure that affordable housing units are still available for the current residents. We want to see growth, but we want to see all of us take advantage of this.
Everybody
growth.
wants to be in Harlem now. Harlem is in, but because there are so many residents in Harlem who are being priced out of the market, it's very important for the HCCI's initiative to work. Now tell me, what motivated HCCI to do it? It is Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement. What motivated them to do this?
Well, Harlem Congregations represents over 90 faith-based institutions in the Harlem community, and they felt it was time for a change, and they chose to use something that joined all of them, faith, and took a stance and took a claim in the area of Harlem. Our focus area began in the Bradhurst corridor, which, as far as you know, I'm sure you've seen, is something remarkable, and then we extended on throughout the Harlem community.
We were talking about Jackie Robinson earlier. There's the Jackie Robinson Park
yes.
near the Bradhurst development. A great swimming pool there that a lot of folks went to when they were kids in Harlem. And then some of the folks moved out during the 60s and 70s. Some of the buildings went into disrepair. And then with city programs, the Harlem Commonwealth CCI got into taking those buildings and then developing them. Now, where did the money come from to do that?
Oh, the money comes through various sources, government dollars, private dollars, and we are known to reach out and work with all of those who are willing to support the present community. And so in that same Jackie Robinson area, that's where we have the location of the new Sutton building. We also work jointly with the Parks Department and the Jackie Robinson Committee for that park to make sure that the area is vibrant. We recently just have an addition of the Bradhurst Village signs hanging on the outside of the park. I work with the City Parks Foundation, and I know we've been very interested in that Jackie Robinson Park and the pool and all those good things up there. Now tell me, the people who are moving in, they're Harlem residents or they're people from outside of the community? You have, as you stated earlier, everybody wants to come to Harlem. So you have people from outside of the community as well as people in the community. Our focus is to keep housing affordable so that local residents are able to participate in these renaissance. The local residents have maintained this neighborhood when others wouldn't really want to venture that far north of Manhattan.
Now, I believe in some of the programs, there are lottery programs, and community residents get the first dibs on the housing.
Yes, you have lottery programs where you have what's termed a local preference. So right now, there's a lottery for buildings in the Marcus Garvey area. There are brownstones that have been
Marcus
developed.
Garvey, for the people who don't know, that's around 121st Street in the park there.
Yeah.
Beautiful park.
Yes, a very prime residential neighborhood in Harlem, filled with history and a very tight community. And so we're talking about buildings that are pricing between $400,000 and $500,000 are available for the lottery. That price still seems high, but these are multiple units, and you're talking in an area where buildings price well over $1 million, if you can
now
imagine.
That area around Mount Morris Park, which is what it used to be called before it was called Marcus Garvey Park, was one of the historic housing areas in New York City around the turn of the century. Many very wealthy people lived there and built those beautiful houses around the park. And the park itself is really great with that big series of rocks in the middle of the park. And again, the City Parks Foundation and New York City Department of Parks and Recreation helped to revive Marcus Garvey Park. They got a great center there. So it's interesting as you talk. I'm like geography, and I can see 121st Street and Fifth Avenue. I can also see 147th Street and Edgecombe Avenue and Bradhurst Avenue. So you got about 25 or 30 blocks that HCCI and other groups are working in to improve, because this really was the heart of Harlem. Going from 116th Street north up to 155th Street, that was the Harlem that you and I knew when I was growing up and when you were thinking about growing up.
Well, that is the area that we work in, pretty much from 116th to 155th Street, and it's changing rapidly.
Now, the other interesting thing is originally those areas were predominantly white. And then as more blacks moved in during World War II and right after, the white population left. And basically blacks rented, some bought. And then when the fiscal crisis came around in the 1960s, the landlords began to abandon the buildings. And these buildings were abandoned. And at one time, 60% of the housing in Harlem was owned by the city, which then led it to the possibility of providing it to community groups and developers to help build it up. So now Harlem has arrived again. That's really something else. So the other part of this, you went over real fast, that some of the buildings are selling for $400,000 or $500,000 or whatever $1,000. Clearly it takes money to acquire these buildings. And since most of us don't have $400,000 to write a check, we have to get a mortgage.
Yes.
And the lending practices in mortgage granting throughout the country, but particularly in developing areas, sometimes is very diverse. Sometimes people don't get fair mortgages. And I know you're very interested in what we call predatory lending. People who are lending you money at high interest rates and foreclosing on loans if you don't pay. Tell us about the problem of predatory lending, first of all, and then tell us what we might be able to do about it.
Well, the problem of predatory lending, is better known as mortgage scams and fraud, is you have so much energy around people wanting to stay in Harlem and move to Harlem. You also invite unwanted guests who tell you, don't worry about your credit, don't worry about you can't get a loan from the banks, I can help you, no problem. And that begins a very sad cycle, because mortgage products are being delivered to people that are not fully disclosed the information. And what I work with is education, and what HCCI provides is we have courses in homebuyer education that are free to the public. So it will take you some time, and we can't promise you a house overnight, but we can definitely work with you about developing a plan, learning about the mortgage process, introducing you to reputable lenders, and home ownership has been accomplished through these homebuyer courses, and that's very crucial. We now have a new initiative with Carver Federal Bank that helps us reach out to those people who may have had problems with mortgage fraud or predatory lenders. So if you've had a problem, we will encourage you to call HCCI, and someone will help you save your home, help you work against a bad situation and see what can be salvaged from that.
Okay, do you have that number that we could put on the screen?
Yes, that number is 212-281-4887, and the extension is 40 is my extension, and my name is Paula Wilson.
And what you do is to be able to give them information about, now tell me about the relationship with Carver. How does that work?
The relationship with Carver is they receive money through the Office of the Treasury for Community Development Funds. Carver is an institution that has been in Harlem for a very long time, and they're very proud of their history. 80% of their money is reinvested in the Harlem community.
Carver is the oldest, the largest, not the oldest, largest black-owned savings bank in the country.
That's
we should know that.
Okay.
And Deborah Wright, who's the CEO, does a really excellent job. And prior to that, Richard Green, who recently passed away, was the CEO. And Carver is well known. They stayed in the community. They invest in the community, which is very, very important. Now, given that now that we've talked about Carver, everybody can knock on that door to get these mortgages. Take us through what it takes to get a mortgage.
What it takes to get a mortgage is, one, the willingness to say, let me look at my current situation. You need to have a decent credit record, and decent means that you have to know what's on your credit report. And
how do you find that out?
How do you find out? Come to our home buyer education class, but there are sources that we will let you know that are free, that are legitimate sources, and we teach you how to read your credit report.
And they will give you a so-called credit score.
Now, the credit score is not free. That's something you have to pay for, but your credit report, which is the basis of your credit score, you can attain free once a year.
Now, that includes your assets, does it not?
The report pretty much states what your payment history has been.
Okay.
If you actually have assets in the form of real estate, that is generally reported, or if you own an automobile that you had to purchase using credit, it shows there.
What about money you owe to credit cards? Will that be on the credit report?
Yes,
too?
that will be there, and that's what we will help you work with, developing a plan either for payment or understanding what that represents. And so credit is important. Another aspect is savings is very important, and through our homebuyer education program, we also talk about down payment assistance monies that are available through various lending institutions, but also you have to come to the homebuyer education. Carver is also a participant in that. It's a combination of monies coming from the city working with the bank for down payment assistance.
This is a classic example of knowledge is power.
Yes.
That if you know, you will have the power to make certain judgments that will save you lots of money and agony later on. Now, talking about a house, I want to buy a house, right? Let's say the house costs, or the apartment costs $200,000. The first thing I need to think about is what kind of down payment, and then after that, I guess I think about what kind of payments I would make on it. How do you determine the amount of the down payment?
The amount of the down payment,
Yeah.
the amount of down payment, has a lot to do with what type of mortgage product you receive. And nowadays, I would dare say it's not like the old formula was 20% down.
Yeah, I remember that.
Now we're talking programs where as little as 3% can be applied. You do have situations where someone could receive 100% financing, but you need to be mindful and cautious. The more you borrow, the more your mortgage payment is.
Because the interest rates are going to be higher.
Right. So we say, like you, knowledge is power. We ask you to come to the classes and find out what is the best fit for you. 100% financing, even though it sounds wonderful, it might not be the best fit. on a monthly basis for you. There may be another mortgage, and I refer to them as products because there are all types of mortgages. And so,
can you give me an example of a couple of types of mortgages?
Oh, types of mortgages are, particularly what we would encourage for a new first-time home buyer is what we refer to as a fixed mortgage product. And fixed means nowadays you have to say for how many years. When I say fixed, I'm either saying 15 years or 30 years that you pay the exact same amount. What is really happening in many communities and with many first-time home buyers, they are working with what's called an adjustable rate mortgage. So maybe for 1 year or 2 years, let's say their payment is $1,000 a month. Then they come to find out when a reset period happens, that payment might go to $1,500, maybe even $2,000, and they basically are unaware because they're new to the whole process, and that can be very problematic.
That's where the education comes in.
That's exactly.
You pay me now, you pay me later. You start out with $1,000, and somebody has to tell them that it is possible, as the rates adjust according to the economy, that your rate might be, interest rate may be high, you have to pay more. Is there any possibility that the interest rate would be lower?
Yes, if the rates go down.
But what determines that? The economy?
It's the economy, and also depends upon what the rate is set on. They have different economic indicators, so it's a series of indicators, and that's also important to know. So for a first-time home buyer, if you think that you want to stay in your home for a reasonable period of time, we would strongly encourage you to look at a fixed mortgage product.
Well, okay, so we're looking at fixed mortgage. How do you go about shopping for the best rate for your fixed mortgage? And what are the determinants on that rate?
Okay, determinants on your rate, a major part of that has to do with your credit history and your credit scores. And if a person will take the time and say, I want to attain their best rate, you're just conscious of paying your bills on time. You may have had some past problems, but in an indication or a record of 12 months of on-time payment for someone with blemish credit is a good way to get a decent rate. So we implore you to just wait it out and demonstrate that you can pay on time. That really determines a lot about your rates.
Now, how does that relate to the amount of the down payment? Let's say that you've had bad credit history, you paid off for a year, okay. Are they going to ask you for a larger down payment if you've had credit problems in the past?
Well, in all honesty, nowadays, there are a lot of products to encourage first-time home buyers in the market. As you know, when you have high rates of ownership, the economy booms. So the government and other lenders or other people in the financial business understand that. So you are still talking about relatively low down payments for first-time home buyers because that's one of the biggest
relatively
blocks.
Below, that means 10% or?
Below 10%. We're talking 6%.
But I read the other day in the Times business section that one of the big mortgage companies is having trouble. In fact, I think they went bankrupt because they gave so many adjustable rate mortgages that people defaulted on, which means they didn't pay them. How is that affecting the mortgage market at this time? The fact that many adjustable rate mortgages, which were given out very easily, are now being defaulted. The default rate on adjustable rates is higher than it has been in several years.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because that's why we encourage people to have fixed mortgage rate. You're going to see a lot of changes in the mortgage market based on those adjustable rates and probably more scrutiny before they're given out, and they won't be given as freely.
What would be the elements involved in the scrutiny? What would they look at more carefully?
What would they look at?
Yeah.
One of the things that as someone working with the community and knowing that those adjustable rates are there is the opportunity to do what they call a loan remodification. Some of those agreements, the way they were structured and developed in the beginning, did not allow for changes. and what they call modification. So if a person is having a problem meeting their mortgage payment and it's adjusting, there's a chance where you may go back and remodify that particular agreement. But if it was developed in the beginning and no allowances were made, then it makes it particularly difficult for someone who's in trouble.
Now, the remodification might be changing the adjustable rate or going to a fixed rate?
A couple of things. It's not necessarily changing the adjustable, but if you're in arrears or if you're delinquent, how do you handle that delinquency amount? Is there a way other than saying, I need the total payment right here, right now?
And that has to be built into the contract, because one of the problems about foreclosures is if you have a lot of these adjustable rates and you do a lot of foreclosures, you still got to sell the property.
That's true.
And when the market goes down, you can't get, when you resell it, what you put up for the mortgage in the first place.
Yeah, lending institutions for the most part do not want to reclaim your home. That's why I encourage, if there's anyone listening and you're having a problem meeting your current mortgage, that you call me and we actually will work with you to speak to your lender. Some people are kind of discouraged and run away from the lender or run away from communication. It's most important that if you don't want to do it yourself, that you have someone that will communicate with your lender, because there's more than enough property and they're not in the business of holding property.
When you communicate with a lender, what do you tell them? Say, this is a good person, they got a little trouble, or you said it's to your interest to make some adjustments so that you don't lose the property. What do you tell them?
Well, in terms of communicating with the lender, in all honesty, lenders read the New York Times like you do. They understand there's a problem in the industry, and you say, I have a person here, and basically the best thing to be able to say is, I have a person here who has consistently paid their mortgage. You now see that they're late in the mortgage, but based on what I'm able to ascertain from their current financial situation, and saying that we can rectify this over a certain period of time if you're willing to work with us. And then they ask for certain kind of documents just to verify whatever I told them.
Now, what constitutes late? 1 day, 15 days, 30 days?
Well, generally, late is late. And I will say that because for any homeowner, it would always serve you to pay on that due date.
On or before.
Yeah, on or before, because exactly.
I know on my mortgage statement it said if you don't pay by X amount, you have to pay so much more, which is a penalty. I imagine that not everyone is aware of that. They say, well, look, if I get it to them in a month, that's okay. But that basically is not okay. Is that what you're telling me? It's
not, and particularly it gets reflected in your credit reporting. So you would, and you bring out the important point, it's on or before. So if you want to develop very good credit habits, you would pay before and make that due date the last date.
Okay, again, for our audience, would you give me a number? Because this is very, very important to people who want to purchase houses.
Okay, the information for Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement, the phone number there is 212-281-4887. My extension is 40.
And you are Paula Wilson.
And I'm Paula Wilson, but I'm sure if you call Harlem Congregation, there are a number of people that are able to help you, but that's my direct number. I work in the home buying education section. We refer to it as equitable development, and we are more than pleased to help.
Now, does the Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement get specialized money for this? Do they raise money for it? Does the federal government give them money to help do this, or the state? How do you fund this activity? It's a great activity. How do you fund it?
It's an assortment of money. We receive funding through HUD. We also receive, of course, at this time, funding from Carver through this initiative, and then there are also other city dollars.
And you have fundraisers.
And we have fundraisers, we write grants and foundation dollars, and we're always looking for more. We accept donations.
And I understand that you've named some of your buildings after icons in the Harlem community. One is the Sutton building. You mentioned that earlier, after Percy Sutton. And I believe you say you have one named after Maya Angelou, the author, and one after our former mayor, David Dinkins, the Joyce and David Dinkins building.
Yes, and that's an exciting project where we also use what they call green materials in the building, and we also will be placing, I want to use the proper term, but children that are in foster care, and now that they'll be going on their own, and we'll have special housing for them as they go into independent living arrangement. And so it's a very exciting project.
It's very clear that HCCI does a lot in the Harlem community. I think it's a model over the country, and you should be very pleased and privileged to work in this activity, because one of the things we want to do is to improve the quality of life in Harlem and make sure people who stayed in Harlem are able to benefit from the rise and the resurgence and the new Harlem Renaissance. Today on African American Legends, we've been talking with Paula Wilson, who's a community educator dealing with housing and housing finance for Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement. Thanks for being with us today, Paula.
Thank you for having me.